Good morning, Sadis. How are you? I hope you all are fine. Today is Monday and the date is the 15th of February 2021. Today we will move to the workbook, page 31. As you all know, we have finished lesson 2 in the student book and we have talked about the F clause type 2 and how we can form questions using the F clause type 2. So today we will answer more questions and have more exercises about the question form of the F clause type 2. So let's start together and let's all together open our box, page 31. Okay, have a look at your box. We have two exercises. Exercise number 1, answer the questions, write 2 options. So we have the question and we need to answer these questions. Okay, we have 6 questions and we need to answer them. And we need to answer them with 2 options. يعني بدنا نجاوب خيارين، بدنا نجاوب جوابين لكل سؤال. Number 2, write questions for these answers. السؤال الثاني بالعكس. We have the answers and we need to write a questions for these answers. Okay? So, let's start together with exercise number 1. Let's read the question together. Answer the questions, write 2 options. Number 1 is already answered. So, each one we will answer it with would and wouldn't. Would and wouldn't. Number 1, what would you do if you failed a school test? Failed التصريف الثالث من fail أو التصريف الثاني من failed رسب أو يرسب. This number 1 is already answered and we have 2 answers. Answer number 1, I would study more. I would study more. Look at the form. Would plus base verb. Would plus base verb. Number 2, I wouldn't go out with my friends. I wouldn't go out. So wouldn't plus again base verb. إذن الجواب بده يكون بwould. إما I would or I wouldn't. Okay, plus base verb, فعل مجرد. Let's move to number 2. Let's read it together. What would you do if you saw a small kitten in your garden? Small kitten, small cat, قطة صغيرة. Okay, what would you do if you saw a small kitten in your garden? What would you do? Think, يا سادس. You need to write 2 options. For example, I can write, I would take it home. I would take it home. I would base verb. Would plus base verb. Or I wouldn't touch it if you're scared of cats. So, I would take it home or I wouldn't touch it. Number 3, where would you go if you had 2 free plane tickets? 2 free plane tickets. So, عنا تذكرتين طائرة مجانا. Where would you go? وين ممكن إنه أنت تسافر؟ You need to write again 2 options. You may say I would go to Italy, Paris, or I wouldn't go to Europe, I wouldn't go to Turkey, I wouldn't go to Egypt. You need to choose I would go or I wouldn't. So, for example, I would go to Italy, I wouldn't go to Egypt. You need to choose 2 countries. The first one is I would go, the second one is I wouldn't go. Okay? Number 4. What would you do if you were the president of your country? President رئيس بلدتك. What would you do? Again, two options يا سادس. Two options. Number one, I would help the poor. I would help all the poor. Would plus base verb. Would إضافة إلى فعل مجرد. I would help all the poor. You need to write another option with wouldn't. So I wouldn't ignore the people's demands. Demands مطالب. I wouldn't ignore لن أتجاهل مطالب شعبي. I wouldn't ignore the people's demands. Okay. Number 5. Where would you take your parents for dinner if you had the money? Where would you take them for dinner? Again, two options. بدنا نكتب two options. One with would, the second with wouldn't. So, for example, I would take them to a fancy restaurant. Fancy يا سادس معناها مترف أو يعني مبين إنه باخذ الثمن. Okay, I would take them to a fancy restaurant, or I wouldn't take them to McDonald's, for example. You need to choose a restaurant. I wouldn't take them to McDonald's, or I would take them to a fancy restaurant. Number 6, and finally, what would you do if you saw someone crying at school? What would you do? You need again to write two options. For example, I would help him, or I wouldn't ignore him. لن أتجاهله. Now look at me يا سادس. Exercise number 1. You need to choose a question. بدي كل واحد فيكم يختار رقم، يختار سؤال and write 2 different answers. وتكتبوا لي إجابتين مختلفات عن اللي أنا كتبتهم بالحصة. Okay? 2 different answers. Now we will move to exercise number 2. Write questions for these answers. بدنا نكتب السؤالات بالعكس. We have the answer and we need to write a question for these answers. So number 1, if I found a kitten in the street, I would take it home. So the question is, what would you do if you found a kitten in the street? What would you do if you found a kitten in the street and the question mark? What would you do if you found? Would do past verb with the if clause. So what would you do if you found a kitten in the street? Number 2, yes, I would. Yes, I would. If I had a large pizza, I would share it with the class. So, yes, I would. This is a what? This is a yes or no question. Excellent. Yes or no question. That means that we need to start with would. هذا سؤال yes or no. بدنا نبتدئ السؤال ب would. So, if you had a large pizza, would you share it? Or would you share a large pizza if you had one? Would you share a large pizza if you had one? Number 3, if I won an award at school, I would call my grandfather. هذه الإجابة لها سؤالين. Maybe you can say, what would you do if you won an award at school? Or whom would you call if you won an award at school? Imma, what would you do? Or who would you call? So what would you do if you won an award at school? Okay. Number 4, and finally, يا سادس, if my parents let me, I would go to a theme park on the weekend. So again, we have two questions. Would you go to a theme park on the weekends if your parents let you? Or what would you do on the weekend if your parents let you? Again, we have two questions. Would you go to a theme park on the weekend if your parents let you? Or what would you do on the weekend if your parents let you? So I will write a question. What would you go to a theme park on the weekend if your parents let you? بهيك خلصت حصة اليوم. بتمنى يا سادس نكتب إجاباتنا على كتبنا please, and don't forget your homework. Exercise number 1, choose a question and answer it with 2 different options. جاوبوا السؤال اللي راح تختاروه بإجابتين مختلفات من اختياركم. اوكي بهيك خلصت حصة اليوم. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye bye.